Beatrice Talford's hands trembled as she gripped the leather lead, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her veins. The stallion, Storm's Edge, her father's final acquisition, reared against the rope, hooves flashing dangerously close to Edmund Haverfield's polished boots. "Enough of this nonsense," Edmund snapped, stepping back with practiced indignation. His face had gone red, the colour creeping up from his collar like spilled wine. "The animal is unmanageable. I've given you 3 weeks, Miss Talford, and he's only grown worse." "He's grieving," Beatrice said, her throat tight. "Animals feel lost just as we do. Storm's Edge was my father's horse. He needs time, not sentiment." Edmund's voice cut through the stable yard, drawing the attention of the grooms, pretending to work nearby. "Your father, God rest him, was a brilliant partner in our endeavour. But he's been gone 4 months now, and I cannot afford to keep a dangerous animal out of misguided loyalty to his memory." The words landed like stones. Beatrice felt the familiar ache of grief mix with something sharper, humiliation. Around them, stable hands paused in their work, eyes averted but ears tuned to every word. This was how Edmund operated, she'd learned. Public pronouncements disguised as private conversations. "I can work with him," she insisted, though Storm's Edge chose that moment to paw the ground, nostrils flaring. "Just another month." "A month?" Edmund laughed, the sound carrying across the cobblestones. "Miss Talford, I permitted you to remain here as an instructor out of respect for your father's contribution to Haverfield Estate. But respect has its limits. This horse is a liability, and your insistence on coddling him reflects poorly on your judgment." Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, but movement near the stable entrance caught her eye. A man stood in the doorway's shadow, tall and still, watching the scene unfold. She couldn't make out his features against the late afternoon sun, but something about his posture, alert, assessing, made her pause. Edmund followed her gaze, his expression shifting from irritation to calculation. "Ah, you must be the new stable master, Ashton, wasn't it?" The stranger stepped forward into the light. Beatrice's first thought was that he didn't look like any stable master she'd known. There was something too precise about the way he moved, too deliberate. His shirt was simple, homespun, his boots worn but well-maintained, yet he carried himself with an economy of motion that suggested discipline rather than labour. "John Ashton," the man confirmed, his voice low and measured. "I arrived this morning. Mr. Haverfield's steward showed me the facilities." "Excellent timing." Edmund gestured towards Storm's Edge, who had begun to calm under Beatrice's steady hand. "You can handle the disposal of this animal. Miss Talford seems unable to accept that some creatures are beyond redemption." Beatrice's stomach dropped. "Disposal?" "The horse will be put down tomorrow morning," Edmund said, not looking at her. "Ashton, see that it's done humanely. We're not barbarians here." "Wait!" Beatrice stepped forward, still gripping the lead. Storm's Edge shifted behind her, his massive head lowering to her shoulder as if seeking comfort. The gesture nearly broke her resolve. "You can't simply... He's worth a fortune if properly trained. Your father invested in a partnership, Miss Talford, which I've honoured beyond legal obligation by allowing you to remain on the estate." Edmund's tone had gone cold now, the pretense of patience abandoned. "But I won't have my generosity mistaken for weakness. The horse is dangerous, and that's final." He turned to leave, dismissing her with the casual cruelty of a man accustomed to getting his way. Beatrice stood frozen, feeling the weight of every eye on her. The grooms, the stable boys, the maids passing through the yard. This was how he did it, she realized. Little humiliations in public spaces, each one chipping away at her position here until she had no choice but to leave. "The horse isn't dangerous," a voice said. "He's afraid." Beatrice and Edmund both turned. John Ashton had moved closer, his grey eyes fixed on Storm's Edge with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something unsettling about that gaze, too sharp, too knowing for a simple stable master. Edmund's jaw tightened. "I beg your pardon." "The horse." Ashton nodded towards Storm's Edge, who had gone still under his scrutiny. "His ears are forward, not pinned back. His breathing is elevated but not aggressive. These aren't signs of a vicious animal. They're signs of an animal in distress. Are you questioning my judgment, Ashton, on your first day?" "I'm offering an observation." Ashton's tone remained neutral, but Beatrice caught something beneath it. Steel wrapped in silk. "You hired me for my experience with difficult horses. This one isn't difficult. He's traumatized." The word hung in the air. Beatrice felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the grief she'd been holding so carefully in check. Traumatized, not broken, not vicious, just hurting. Edmund's face had gone dark. "The decision is made." Then perhaps it was made prematurely. Ashton met his gaze without flinching. "Give me 2 weeks with the horse. If I can't make progress, you lose nothing. If I can, you gain a valuable asset. And if he injures someone in those 2 weeks?" "He won't." The confidence in those 2 words was absolute. Beatrice stared at this stranger, this man who'd appeared out of nowhere and was now standing between her father's horse and death, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Edmund's mouth compressed into a thin line. He was clearly unaccustomed to being challenged, even politely. But he was also a businessman, and Ashton had framed the offer in terms of profit and loss. 1 week, Edmund said finally. "And if there's any sign of danger, the horse goes immediately. Miss Talford, you're responsible for supervising Mr. Ashton's work. Since you're so invested in the animal's welfare, you can share the blame if this fails." He strode away before either of them could respond, his boots clicking sharply against the cobblestones. The grooms scattered back to their tasks, the entertainment over. Beatrice found herself alone with the stranger who'd just saved Storm's Edge's life, temporarily at least. She turned to face him properly. Up close, he was even more arresting than she'd first thought. There was something aristocratic about his features, high cheekbones, a straight nose, eyes that seemed to calculate and catalogue everything they saw. His hands, though, were what caught her attention. They were strong and capable, but the calluses were in the wrong places for a man who'd spent his life working with horses. "Thank you," she said quietly, "though I'm not sure why you intervened. Most men in your position wouldn't risk angering their employer on the first day. Most men in my position wouldn't recognize good breeding when they see it." He moved past her towards Storm's Edge, who watched him approach with wary intelligence. "That's a thoroughbred cross, isn't it? Arabian bloodline." Beatrice blinked, surprised. "You can tell from looking?" "The bone structure, the way he carries his head." Ashton stopped just outside Storm's Edge's striking distance, not approaching further. "Your father had an excellent eye." The casual mention of her father made her throat tight again. "You knew him?" "No." Something flickered across Ashton's face. Hesitation, perhaps, or calculation. "But I know horses, and I know that animal was bred for competition, not execution." He extended one hand slowly, palm down, letting Storm's Edge catch his scent. The stallion snorted, tossing his head, but didn't retreat. Beatrice watched, fascinated despite herself, as Ashton stood perfectly still, waiting. It was a technique her father had taught her. Patience as active choice, rather than passive waiting. "You're not like other stable masters I've met," she said. Ashton's mouth quirked slightly, not quite a smile. "I'll take that as a compliment." It wasn't meant as one, or an insult. She stepped closer, still holding the lead rope. "Just an observation." "Fair enough." Storm's Edge had begun to relax, his ears swiveling toward Ashton's voice. "I'm not like most stable masters you've met because I wasn't always a stable master." "What were you before?" He met her eyes then, and for a moment Beatrice felt like she was being studied by something sharper than curiosity. Someone who made mistakes and is trying to correct them. It was an odd answer, cryptic and somehow intimate at once. Beatrice found herself wanting to press for details, but Storm's Edge chose that moment to step forward, his nose brushing Ashton's outstretched hand. The tension in the stallion's body eased slightly, his breathing deepening. "There," Ashton murmured. "Not so dangerous after all." "He still needs time," Beatrice said. "1 week isn't enough to fully rehabilitate him." "I know." Ashton lowered his hand, stepping back to give Storm's Edge space. "Which is why we're going to have to work efficiently. Tell me about his history, everything. When your father acquired him, how he was trained, what happened in the weeks before the accident." The word accident was carefully neutral, but Beatrice heard the question beneath it. "My father died in a coaching accident overseas. He was returning from a breeding auction in Ireland. The roads were poor, the weather worse. The coach overturned. I'm sorry for your loss." Udisern. The words were standard condolence, but Ashton's tone wasn't. There was something genuine in it, something that acknowledged the inadequacy of language in the face of grief without trying to minimize or explain it away. Beatrice found herself nodding, accepting the sentiment. "Storm's Edge arrived 2 weeks after we received news of his death," she continued. "My father had purchased him at that same auction, along with another mare. The mare was sold almost immediately, but Storm's Edge... Edmund kept him here, said he wanted to honor my father's final acquisition. I thought it was kindness. But now, I think he kept the horse as leverage, something to hold over me when he wanted me gone." It was the first time she'd said it aloud, and the words felt both liberating and terrifying. Ashton regarded her steadily, his expression unreadable. "Why would Mr. Haverfield want you gone?" Beatrice hesitated. There was something about this stranger that invited confidence, but she barely knew him. "That's a complicated question. We have a week to work together. Might as well start with complications." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it, short, slightly bitter. "You're very direct, Mr. Ashton." "John," he corrected, "and I find that directness saves time. Time we don't have if we're going to save that horse." He was right, of course. Beatrice glanced at Storm's Edge, who had begun to graze at the sparse grass near the stable entrance, his earlier agitation fading. The stallion was beautiful, even in distress, all long lines and contained power, bred for speed and endurance. Like her father, she'd always seen horses not just as animals, but as partners, creatures worthy of respect and understanding. "My father was Edmund Haverfield's business partner," she said finally. "They bred competition horses together, racing stock mostly, though some were trained for show. When my father died, the partnership didn't transfer to me. Women can't legally hold such positions." "But your father's share of the horses should have come to me, yes. But Edmund claims everything was under joint ownership, and without my father here to contest it." She shrugged, trying for nonchalance and failing. "I'm permitted to work here as an instructor because Edmund says it's what my father would have wanted. But I suspect it's because I still have value to him." "What kind of value?" "I know the horses. I know their bloodlines, their quirks, which mares produce the best foals. My father kept meticulous records, and I helped him maintain them. Edmund needs that knowledge, but he doesn't want to pay for it. And he certainly doesn't want to share credit for it." Ashton's jaw had tightened, almost imperceptibly. "So he keeps you dependent, offers just enough security to make leaving difficult, while ensuring you never gain real power. You understand it remarkably quickly. I've seen similar situations." His tone had gone flat, and Beatrice wondered what exactly he'd seen and where. "These records your father kept, do you still have access to them?" The question felt loaded somehow, though Beatrice couldn't identify why. "Yes. They're in the tack room office. I've been maintaining them since his death." "Why?" Because if we're going to train Storm's Edge properly, I'll need to understand his bloodline, what traits he's bred for, what temperament patterns might be in his ancestry. Ashton glanced toward the stable building. Would you be willing to show me the records? Not now. Edmund will be watching. But perhaps tomorrow evening, after the regular work is done. There was something odd about the request, Beatrice thought. Stable masters didn't typically need detailed pedigree information to train a horse. They relied on observation and experience. But then nothing about John Ashton seemed typical. "All right," she said slowly. "Tomorrow evening, after supper." "Good." He turned back to Storm's Edge, who had finished grazing and was watching them both with dark, intelligent eyes. "In the meantime, I want you to work with him as you normally would. Don't change your routine. I need to observe how he responds to someone he trusts before I attempt anything myself. He doesn't fully trust me yet. But he doesn't fear you. That's a start." Ashton's gaze shifted back to her, and Beatrice felt the weight of it, assessing, curious, almost unsettlingly intent. "You said you've been working with him for 3 weeks. 3 weeks tomorrow. And in that time, has he shown any actual aggression, biting, striking without provocation?" "No. He's reactive, shies at sudden movements, pulls against restraint, but never truly aggressive." "Then Edmund's assessment is wrong." Ashton said it like a simple fact, no judgment attached. "The question is whether he's wrong through ignorance or intent." The implication hung between them. Beatrice felt a chill despite the warm afternoon air. "You think Edmund wants the horse put down for a reason beyond safety?" "I think Edmund Haverfield doesn't do anything without a reason, and I think you should be careful around him, Miss Talford." "Beatrice," she said, matching his earlier correction. "If we're going to work together, you should call me Beatrice." For the first time since he'd arrived, John Ashton smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed his austere features into something warmer. "Beatrice, then." The way he said her name made something flutter in her chest, unexpected and inappropriate. She looked away, suddenly aware of the intimacy of standing here together in the dimming light, discussing conspiracies and trust with a man she'd known for less than an hour. "I should get back to the house," she said. "The evening lessons will start soon." "Of course." Ashton bent to pick up Storm's Edge's lead rope, which she'd dropped during their conversation. His fingers brushed hers as he handed it back, and Beatrice felt the contact like a spark. "I'll see you tomorrow evening. Tack room office, after supper." "After supper," she echoed, then led Storm's Edge back toward his stall, acutely aware of Ashton's gaze on her back, until she disappeared into the stable's shadowed interior. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the instructor's quarters above the carriage house, Beatrice replayed the day's events. Edmund's public humiliation, the mysterious stable master who'd appeared like some character from a Gothic novel, the way Ashton had looked at Storm's Edge and at her with that penetrating, calculating gaze. Something was happening at Haverfield Estate, something beyond her father's death and her precarious position. She could feel it in the air like approaching thunder, a pressure building towards some inevitable break. And John Ashton, whoever he really was, stood at the center of that gathering storm. The next evening arrived, wrapped in the golden light of early autumn, the kind of light that made even the mundane corners of Haverfield Estate seem touched by grace. Beatrice finished her final lesson. Lady Thornbury's daughter, who rode with more enthusiasm than skill, and made her way to the tack-room office as the shadows lengthened. She found John Ashton already there, standing before the filing cabinet where her father's records were kept. He'd lit a single oil lamp, its flame casting warm light across the cramped space. The office smelled of leather and saddle soap, familiar scents that usually comforted her but now felt charged with tension. "You're early," she said, closing the door behind her. "I finished my work quickly." Ashton gestured to the cabinet. "I hope you don't mind. I was admiring the organization. Your father's system. Mine, actually. Papa kept everything in his head. I convinced him to write it down about 5 years ago." Beatrice moved to the desk, pulling keys from her pocket. He used to say that memory was more reliable than paper. But I worried what would happen if... She trailed off, the irony sharp and bitter. If something happened to him, Ashton finished quietly. Yes. She unlocked the cabinet, revealing rows of leather-bound ledgers and loose files. Everything's here. Bloodlines going back 3 generations, training notes, competition results, breeding schedules, even correspondence with other breeders. Ashton stepped closer, his attention fixed on the records with an intensity that seemed excessive for simple curiosity. He pulled out one of the ledgers, opening it carefully. His finger traced down a column of dates and names, and Beatrice watched his expression shift, a tightening around his eyes, an almost imperceptible tension in his jaw. "This is remarkable," he said. "The level of detail, bloodlines traced back to foundation stock, performance metrics, even temperament notes for each animal. My father believed in thoroughness. He said that understanding a horse's ancestry was like reading its future, not predetermined but probable. Your father was a wise man." Ashton continued scanning the pages, his movements methodical and practiced. These records would be valuable to anyone in the breeding business. They are valuable. Edmund uses them constantly, though he pretends he doesn't need my input. Beatrice perched on the edge of the desk. "Why all this interest in the paperwork, John? I thought you wanted to understand Storm's Edge's bloodline." He looked up then, and something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, then decision. "I do, but I'm also interested in the business itself, how it operates, how profits are divided, how breeding decisions are made." "That's unusually specific for a stable master." "I told you I wasn't always a stable master." "Yes, but you didn't tell me what you were before." They regarded each other in the lamplight, the small office suddenly feeling smaller. Beatrice could hear her own heartbeat loud in the quiet. There was something happening here, beyond a simple exchange of information, some test being conducted that she didn't fully understand. "I was a businessman," Ashton said finally. "Import trade, mostly. I did well for a time, but I made poor decisions. Trusted the wrong people, lost nearly everything. And came here to start over? Something like that." He closed the ledger carefully, replacing it in the cabinet. "The truth is, Beatrice, I'm trying to rebuild my life in a way that matters. Working with horses, with living things, rather than ledgers and contracts. It feels honest, pure, in a way commerce never was." There was something vulnerable in the admission, something that made Beatrice's chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. She'd spent so much of the past 4 months feeling like the only person struggling to find solid ground that she'd forgotten others might be doing the same. "I understand that feeling," she said softly. "After Papa died, everyone kept telling me to move on, to find a new position elsewhere, but leaving here felt like abandoning the last piece of him I had left. So you stayed, even though Haverfield treats you poorly." "I stayed because the horses need someone who remembers what my father wanted for them, someone who sees them as more than profit margins." She smiled, though it felt sad. "I suppose we're both trying to find meaning in the wreckage, aren't we?" "Perhaps we are." Ashton moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening stable yard. From this angle, with lamplight catching the planes of his face, he looked almost haunted. A man carrying weights invisible to others. "Tell me about Storm's Edge's ancestry," he said, shifting back to safer ground. "What makes him valuable beyond his obvious quality?" Beatrice pulled out another ledger, flipping to the relevant entries. "His sire was Midnight Runner, one of the finest racing stallions in Ireland. His dam was Whisper's Grace, an Arabian mare with bloodlines going back to the Dali Arabian himself. The cross is rare. Most breeders either go full thoroughbred or full Arabian, but Papa believed in selective crossing for specific traits. Speed and endurance." "Exactly. Storm's Edge should have his sire's speed and his dam's stamina. He's built for distance racing, the kind that requires both explosive power and sustained effort. Ashton had moved closer, reading over her shoulder. She was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of him, the faint scent of soap and leather. It was improper, being alone with him like this, but the estate's gossip had already decided she was compromised by her situation. What was one more small transgression? And Edmund plans to destroy this breeding? Ashton's voice had gone cold. He claims Storm's Edge is too dangerous to train, but I think... Beatrice hesitated, then pushed forward. I think he wants to eliminate any horse that might remind people of my father's expertise. Edmund takes credit for the successful breeding program, but most of the foundation work was Papa's. Storm's Edge is living proof of that. So disposing of him serves multiple purposes, removes the evidence, reasserts Edmund's authority, and punishes you for questioning his decisions. The assessment was brutally accurate. Beatrice felt something shift in her chest. Relief, perhaps, at having her suspicions validated. Or maybe recognition, the sense of finding someone who understood the particular cruelty of Edmund's methods. You see it very clearly, she said. I've known men like Edmund Haverfield, men who wrap cruelty in the language of business necessity. Ashton's hand had clenched into a fist on the desk's edge, knuckles white. He noticed her looking and relaxed deliberately. I apologize. This situation frustrates me more than it should. Why should it frustrate you at all? You've only just arrived. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made Beatrice's breath catch. Because I don't like seeing people mistreated, and because Storm's Edge deserves better than to die for human politics. So you'll save him in 1 week? I'll do everything in my power to try. He paused, then added, but I'll need your help. Working together, we might manage what neither of us could alone. It was a partnership offer, and something more. Beatrice felt the weight of it, the implicit trust, the shared risk. If they failed, she would bear the brunt of Edmund's displeasure, but if they succeeded... All right, she said. Partners. Ashton smiled, extending his hand. It was a masculine gesture, the kind of handshake offered between equals in business. Beatrice took it, feeling the strength in his grip, the calluses that didn't quite match his supposed profession. His hand lingered in hers a moment longer than necessary, thumb brushing her knuckles in a gesture that felt more intimate than a simple handshake warranted. Partners, he echoed. They spent the next hour reviewing records, with Ashton asking surprisingly detailed questions about breeding protocols, registration procedures, and the estate's relationship with various racing associations. Some questions seemed strange. Inquiries about documentation practices, how disputes were resolved, whether third parties verified breeding claims. You're very thorough, Beatrice observed after he'd asked about certificate authentication procedures. Most people wouldn't care about such administrative details. Administrative details matter. They're where truth hides, or where lies are built. He caught her puzzled expression and smiled. Old habit from my trading days. You learn to verify everything. Edmund doesn't like verification. He says questions imply distrust. Edmund is hiding something. The statement hung between them, too bold to ignore. Beatrice's pulse quickened. What makes you say that? Ashton gestured to the ledgers spread before them. These records are meticulous, every breeding carefully documented, every lineage verified. But Edmund manages the business now, correct? The contracts, the sales, the competition registrations? Yes. I maintain the bloodline records, but everything else goes through him. Have you ever compared your records to his? No. Why would I? Because if someone wanted to falsify bloodlines, claim a horse had better breeding than it actually did, they'd need to control both the public documentation and the private records. If you maintain one set and he maintains the other without cross-checking... Beatrice's mind raced. You think Edmund is forging registration documents? I think it's possible, and I think you should be very careful about what you tell him regarding these records. John, if you're right, if he's committing fraud, that's serious. Buyers pay premiums for verified bloodlines. If Edmund's lying about breeding, then he's stealing from his clients and destroying the reputation your father spent decades building. Ashton's expression had gone grim, which gives him even more reason to want you gone. You're the only person who could expose him. The room felt suddenly colder. Beatrice wrapped her arms around herself, processing the implications. If Edmund was forging documents, her father's partnership share, the horses she should have inherited, might have been stolen through falsified paperwork. Everything she'd accepted as unfortunate circumstance could be deliberate theft. I need proof, she said finally. Real proof, not just suspicion. Agreed, which is why we're going to be very careful. Ashton began returning the ledgers to the cabinet, his movements efficient. Keep maintaining these records as you always have. Don't let Edmund know we've discussed this, and if you notice any discrepancies, anything that doesn't match between your records and his official documents, tell me immediately. Why are you doing this? Beatrice asked. Helping me, I mean. You barely know me, and exposing Edmund could cost you your position. Ashton paused, a ledger in his hands. In the lamplight, his features seemed carved from shadow and uncertainty. Let's just say I have personal reasons for disliking fraud, and leave it at that for now. It wasn't a full answer, but Beatrice found herself accepting it. Everyone carried secrets, after all. She had no right to demand his when her own grief was still so raw, so carefully guarded. Tomorrow, she said, we should start working with Storm's Edge together. If we only have a week, 5 days now, Ashton corrected. We've lost time already. Then we can't waste any more. I'll meet you at the training ring at dawn. Dawn. He nodded, then moved toward the door, hesitating with his hand on the knob. Beatrice, be careful around Edmund. If he suspects you're questioning his version of events. I know how to manage Edmund Haverfield. I don't doubt it. But management and safety aren't the same thing. He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Beatrice remained in the office, surrounded by her father's legacy, and wondered what exactly she'd agreed to. Partnership with a mysterious stable master who asked too many questions and saw too clearly. An investigation into potential fraud by the man who controlled her livelihood. Outside, night had fully fallen, and somewhere in the darkness, Storm's Edge moved restlessly in his stall, another creature caught in currents beyond his understanding. Dawn came cold and grey, mist rising from the paddocks like breath. Beatrice found John Ashton already in the training ring, studying Storm's Edge with that same intense focus she'd noticed yesterday. The stallion stood at the far end of the enclosed space, watching them both with wary intelligence. "You're early," she said, slipping through the gate. "So are you." They stood side by side, neither moving toward the horse. This was strategy, Beatrice knew, letting Storm's Edge grow accustomed to their presence before making demands. It was the patient approach, the one her father had always advocated. "Tell me how you've been working with him," Ashton said quietly. "Slowly. I start each session just standing here, letting him approach if he chooses. Then simple requests. Come forward, turn, stop. Never force, never punish. Just patience and reward." "And has he improved?" "Some days yes, others no. It's inconsistent, which is part of why Edmund claims he's unmanageable. But I think Storm's Edge is testing me, trying to understand if I can be trusted." "Smart horse." Ashton's mouth quirked. "How long do you typically wait before approaching?" 10 minutes usually, sometimes 15 if he's particularly anxious." They fell silent, their breathing visible in the cold air. Beatrice found the quiet companionable rather than awkward, a shared focus that didn't require constant conversation. She studied Ashton's profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes tracked Storm's Edge's every movement. "You really do care about horses," she said softly. "This isn't just a job for you." "No, it isn't." He glanced at her briefly. "I grew up around horses. My father kept a stable, nothing commercial, just personal pleasure. I learned to ride before I learned to read properly. But you left that life for commerce." "I left that life because it was expected of me. My father had plans. I was meant to follow a certain path." Something bitter crossed his expression. "But we don't always get to choose our paths, do we? Sometimes they're chosen for us. And sometimes we fight back. Sometimes we try." Storm's Edge had begun to move, circling the perimeter of the ring. His gait was fluid, despite the tension in his body, pure athleticism barely contained. Watching him, Beatrice felt the familiar ache of grief, mixing with pride. Her father had recognized this horse's potential immediately, had paid a fortune at auction because he saw something worth saving. "I think we can approach now," she said. They moved together slowly, keeping their shoulders aligned to present a unified front. Storm's Edge paused mid-stride, ears swiveling toward them. His nostrils flared, scenting the air, processing their intent. "Let him come to us," Ashton murmured. "Don't pursue." They stopped walking, standing completely still. The seconds stretched, marked by heartbeats and breath. Then, slowly, Storm's Edge took one step toward them, then another. His head was high, alert for danger, but he was choosing to approach rather than retreat. "Good," Beatrice whispered. "That's good." When Storm's Edge was close enough to touch, Ashton extended his hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. The stallion sniffed cautiously, then allowed brief contact. It was a small victory, but victories came in increments with traumatized animals. "Your turn," Ashton said to Beatrice. She mirrored his gesture, feeling Storm's Edge's breath warm against her skin. The horse's dark eyes studied her with something that might have been recognition, or might have been hope. Either way, it felt like progress. They worked for another hour, establishing basic trust, never pushing too hard, never demanding more than Storm's Edge seemed willing to give. By the time the sun had burned away the mist, the stallion was accepting touch from both of them, even allowing Ashton to check his hooves, a sign of significant trust. "We might actually manage this," Beatrice said, as they led Storm's Edge back to his stall. "If we keep making progress at this rate." "Miss Talford." Edmund Haverfield's voice cut through her optimism like a blade. He stood near the stable entrance, dressed for riding, his expression carefully neutral. Behind him lurked Thomas Gentry, his head groom, a thick-necked man who'd always made Beatrice uncomfortable. "Mr. Haverfield," she said evenly, "we were just finishing the morning session." "So I see." Edmund's gaze moved between her and Ashton with calculating assessment. "Making progress?" "Some," Ashton answered before Beatrice could speak. "The horse is responding to consistent handling. Another few days should show significant improvement." Edmund approached Storm's Edge, who immediately tensed. "He seems calm enough now, I'll grant you, but Gentry tells me the horse tried to kick him yesterday when he attempted to clean the stall." Beatrice's stomach sank. She glanced at Gentry, who nodded solemnly, his expression a mask of false concern. "Nearly caught me in the ribs, he did. Vicious creature." It was a lie. Beatrice had been nearby yesterday and heard nothing of the kind. But Edmund was watching her face, gauging her reaction, and she forced herself to remain composed. "Storm's Edge is protective of his space," she said carefully, "but with proper approach, he's manageable. We've just demonstrated that. You've demonstrated that he tolerates you, Miss Talford, not that he's suitable for general handling." Edmund's tone was reasonable, which made it more dangerous. "I can't have a horse on the property that poses a risk to my staff. He doesn't pose a risk if handled correctly." "Correctly according to whose standards? Yours?" Edmund smiled thinly. "You're an instructor, Miss Talford, not a miracle worker. And I'm afraid Ashton's presence doesn't change the fundamental problem. The horse is unstable." Beatrice opened her mouth to argue. But Ashton touched her elbow gently, a warning. She glanced at him and saw the message in his eyes. Don't fight this battle now. We still have 5 days, Ashton said to Edmund. The agreement was 1 week. So it was. Edmund adjusted his riding gloves with deliberate precision. I'll expect a full demonstration of the horse's tractability at the end of that week, in front of witnesses. If Storm's Edge can be saddled, ridden, and handled by someone other than you two, I'll reconsider my decision. It was a trap, Beatrice realized. 5 days wasn't enough to fully rehabilitate Storm's Edge to the point where a stranger could ride him. Edmund was setting impossible standards, giving them false hope while ensuring failure. That's acceptable, Ashton said, surprising both Beatrice and Edmund. We'll be ready. Edmund's eyes narrowed slightly. You're very confident, Ashton. I'm realistic. The horse has good breeding and intelligence. With proper training, he'll demonstrate both. We'll see. Edmund turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Miss Talford, I'll need you to prepare a full inventory of the breeding records. My solicitor requires updated documentation for some business matters. Have it ready by week's end. He left before Beatrice could question the request. Gentry followed, casting one last malicious glance at Storm's Edge. When they were alone again, Beatrice rounded on Ashton. You shouldn't have agreed to those terms. 5 days isn't enough. To make him rideable by a stranger, no, but to prove he's not dangerous. That's possible. Ashton had gone tense, his jaw tight. And that inventory request, that's what we discussed last night. He's planning something. What do you mean? Think about it. Edmund demands updated documentation at the exact moment we're most distracted by Storm's Edge. He's either trying to keep you busy, or he needs current records for some purpose. Beatrice's mind raced. If he's selling horses with falsified bloodlines, he'd need records that appear current and legitimate. My records would provide authenticity. Exactly. Which means we need to be very careful about what you give him. Ashton glanced toward the stable entrance, ensuring they were truly alone. Can you make copies, document everything before you hand over the originals? It would take hours, days even. Then we work nights, after everyone else is asleep. The suggestion was scandalous and practical in equal measure. Beatrice should refuse. Her reputation was precarious enough without late-night meetings with the mysterious new stablemaster. But if Edmund was truly stealing from her father's legacy, from the horses themselves— "All right," she said. "Tonight, after the house is dark." They spent the rest of the day in careful performance. Beatrice taught her scheduled lessons, maintaining her usual routine. She saw Ashton working throughout the stable, mucking stalls, checking tack, consulting with otton grooms. He played his role perfectly, asking no questions that might seem suspicious, drawing no unusual attention. But that evening, when shadows swallowed the estate and most residents had retired, Beatrice slipped back to the tackroom office. She found Ashton already there, 2 lamps lit, paper and ink prepared. "We should start with the most recent records," he said without preamble. "The past year's breeding and sales." They worked in focused silence, Beatrice reading entries aloud while Ashton copied them in neat script. His handwriting surprised her, elegant and precise, more educated than a stable master's should be. Another mystery to add to the growing collection. Around midnight, fatigue began to blur the numbers. Beatrice rubbed her eyes, stifling a yawn. "We've finished the breeding records. Sales documents next?" "Yes, but—" Ashton had gone still, his attention fixed on one of Edmund's official ledgers. "Beatrice, look at this." She leaned over his shoulder, following his finger down a column of sales. "What am I seeing?" "This horse, Midnight's Promise. According to your father's bloodline records, she's by Tempest Call out of Morning Star, correct?" Beatrice pulled the relevant ledger, checking. "Yes, that's right. But Edmund's sales documentation lists her as by Storm King out of Morning Star." He showed her the registration certificate. Different sire entirely. Storm King was a champion racer. His offspring command much higher prices. The implication hit like a physical blow. He's lying about parentage. And if he's doing it with one horse... Ashton began pulling more sales records, comparing them to Beatrice's bloodline documentation. With each comparison, the pattern became clearer. Small alterations, careful changes, always upgrading the supposed breeding to justify higher sale prices. "This is fraud," Beatrice whispered, "on a massive scale. This is theft." Ashton's voice had gone cold with anger. "From every buyer, from every honest breeder, from your father's reputation, and possibly from you directly." He pulled another document, partnership dissolution papers, signed shortly after her father's death. Beatrice scanned them, her heart sinking with each line. The agreement stated that all jointly owned horses would remain with Edmund as sole proprietor, with a small settlement paid to the late partner's estate. "I received that settlement," she said numbly. £500. I thought it was generous under the circumstances." "Generous?" Ashton's laugh was bitter. "Beatrice, based on these breeding records, your father's share should have been worth 10 times that amount. Minimum. Edmund paid you a pittance and kept everything." The room tilted slightly. Beatrice gripped the desk edge, forcing herself to breathe. £500. It had seemed like a fortune to her, enough to live modestly for a few years if she was careful. But if Ashton was right, if her father's share was worth thousands... "He stole my inheritance," she said, "and my father's life's work. Everything we built." "Yes." Ashton's hand covered hers on the desk, warm, steadying. "But now we have proof. These discrepancies, the falsified bloodlines, the undervalued settlement, it's all documented. Documented by us, in private, with no witnesses. Edmund will deny everything. He'll say we forged these copies, that we're trying to extort him. Then we need to make him confess, publicly, where denial becomes impossible." "How?" Beatrice pulled away, pacing the small office. "He's too careful, too controlled. Men like Edmund don't confess. They double down. They attack the accusers. Men like Edmund also panic when cornered, when they realize their careful structures are collapsing." Ashton stood, moving to intercept her pacing. "We have 5 days to save Storm's Edge. We use that time to also build our case. Gather more evidence, identify witnesses, create a situation where Edmund's only option is admission. That's impossible. So is rehabilitating a traumatized horse in 1 week. Yet here we are, attempting both." Despite everything, Beatrice felt a laugh bubble up, slightly hysterical, tinged with exhaustion. "You're either very brave or very foolish, John Ashton. Neither, just stubborn." His expression softened, the harsh angles of his face easing. "And I hate seeing injustice rewarded. Your father deserved better. You deserve better. Storm's Edge deserves better. Why do you care so much?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "I don't understand why a stable master would risk everything for horses and records, and a stranger's stolen inheritance." Ashton was quiet for a long moment, something warring in his expression. Then, "Because I once had the power to stop an injustice and chose not to, chose comfort and safety over doing what was right, and that choice cost someone everything." The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Beatrice saw the guilt in his eyes, the weight he carried. She recognized it because she carried similar weight. Survivor's guilt, the constant question of what she could have done differently. "We all make choices we regret," she said softly. "Yes, but we can choose differently going forward." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm choosing to help you, Beatrice, not just because it's right, but because I need to prove to myself that I can, that I'm not the coward I was before." The vulnerability in those words made her chest ache. She stepped closer, bridging the space between them without conscious decision. "You're not a coward. You're here, aren't you, fighting someone else's battle. Our battle now. Partners. Remember. Partners. They stood close enough that Beatrice could feel his warmth, could see the flecks of darker grey in his eyes. The lamplight cast shadows across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows. He was handsome in a severe way, she realized, all sharp edges and controlled intensity. Ashton's hand rose slowly, almost unconsciously, reaching toward her face. His fingers hovered near her cheek, not quite touching, asking permission. Beatrice's breath caught. She should step back, should maintain propriety, but instead she found herself leaning into the almost touch, closing the distance. His fingers grazed her cheekbone, gentle despite the calluses. Beatrice! A sound outside, footsteps on gravel. They sprang apart as if burned, both turning toward the window. Beatrice's heart hammered as a figure passed by the office, too dark to identify. The footsteps faded, heading toward the main house. "We should stop for tonight," Ashton said, his voice rougher than usual. "It's late. People might notice you're gone." He was right, of course. Beatrice nodded, trying to calm her racing pulse. "Tomorrow we'll work with Storm's Edge again, and continue documenting the records." "Tomorrow," he agreed. She gathered her shawl, preparing to leave, but paused at the door. "John, thank you for believing me, for helping when you didn't have to." "I always had to." His smile was small but genuine. "The question was whether I'd be brave enough to try." Beatrice slipped out into the night, the autumn air cold against her flushed cheeks. Behind her, lamplight glowed in the office window, and she imagined Ashton there, continuing his methodical documentation of Edmund's crimes. She'd come to Haverfield Estate after her father's death, planning to simply survive, to maintain the last connection to him she had left. But now, with this mysterious stable-master who carried his own ghosts, she found herself thinking about justice instead, about fighting back, about what it might mean to be chosen by someone who saw her clearly and helped anyway. The next 3 days passed in a blur of careful performance and mounting tension. Beatrice and Ashton worked with Storm's Edge each dawn, making steady progress. The stallion was learning to trust again, accepting saddle and bridle, even tolerating weight on his back, but full rehabilitation to the point where a stranger could ride him. That remained impossible within their deadline. Meanwhile, they continued documenting Edmund's fraud at night, building a case that grew more damning with each discrepancy they uncovered. The scope was staggering. Years of falsified bloodlines, inflated prices, buyers deceived into paying premiums for horses of lesser breeding. Edmund had built his reputation on her father's work, then corrupted that legacy for profit. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. They needed Edmund to expose himself, and Beatrice had no idea how to accomplish that. On the 4th morning, she arrived at the training ring to find Ashton already working with Storm's Edge. The stallion was wearing full tack, standing calmly while Ashton checked the saddle girth. It was remarkable progress. 3 days ago, Storm's Edge would have fought the equipment. Now he accepted it with only minor nervousness. "He's ready for mounted work," Ashton said as Beatrice approached. "Not for stranger riding, but for someone he trusts." "Are you suggesting I ride him?" "I'm suggesting we both ride him, separately then together, build his confidence, show him that carrying a rider doesn't mean losing control." It was risky. If Storm's Edge panicked with either of them mounted, injury was likely, but it was also their best chance to meet Edmund's impossible deadline. "All right," Beatrice said. "Who first?" "You. He knows you longer." Beatrice approached Storm's Edge slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. The stallion's ears flicked toward her voice, his dark eyes alert but not afraid. She gathered the reins, feeling the leather familiar in her hands. Her father had taught her to ride on horses just like this, powerful and intelligent. Placing her foot in the stirrup, she mounted in one smooth motion. Storm's Edge shifted beneath her weight but didn't bolt. His muscles tensed, ready for flight, but he waited, trusting her to guide him. "Good boy," she murmured, settling deeper into the saddle. "That's good." They walked the perimeter of the ring, Beatrice maintaining light contact with the reins, letting Storm's Edge find his balance with her weight. After 3 circuits, his gait began to relax, the tension easing from his stride. By the 5th circuit, he was moving with something approaching grace, all that breeding, all that potential, finally able to express itself. She dismounted, breathless with exhilaration. "Your turn." Ashton mounted with the same efficient grace, his seat in the saddle natural and practiced. Storm's Edge accepted him with less initial nervousness. The horse was learning that riders didn't mean pain. They worked through the same progression, walk to trot, building trust with each stride. Watching them, Beatrice felt something shift in her chest. Ashton rode like he'd been born to it, his body moving in perfect sync with Storm's Edge's motion. This was no mere stable master's competence. This was aristocratic training, the kind of riding education available only to wealth and privilege. Who was John Ashton really? When he dismounted, his smile was genuine and unguarded, pure joy at the horse's progress. "He's magnificent. Your father chose well." "My father always did." Beatrice helped remove Storm's Edge's tack, her hands working automatically while her mind churned. "John, you ride like someone who had expensive lessons as a boy?" "I did." He didn't look at her, focusing on the saddle. "I told you I grew up around horses. My father was particular about proper riding." "Your father must have been very wealthy." "He is." The correction was, is. The correction was bitter, but wealth doesn't guarantee wisdom, or kindness, or any of the things that actually matter. Before Beatrice could press further, a stable boy appeared at the ring's edge. "Miss Talford, Mr. Haverfield wants to see you in his study. Says it's urgent." Dread coiled in Beatrice's stomach. Edmund rarely summoned her to the main house. Their interactions were carefully staged in public spaces where he could control the narrative. A private meeting meant something had changed. "Go," Ashton said quietly. "I'll finish with Storm's Edge." Beatrice found Edmund in his study, a room she'd only entered twice before, once with her father during partnership negotiations, once to receive her paltry settlement after his death. The space reeked of masculine privilege, dark wood paneling, leather furniture, hunting trophies, mounted on walls like testimony to dominance. Edmund sat behind his massive desk, her father's breeding ledgers spread before him. The sight of those familiar books in his hands made Beatrice's jaw tighten. "Miss Talford, thank you for coming promptly." Edmund gestured to a chair across from him. "Please sit." She remained standing. "The stable boy said it was urgent." "Indeed." Edmund's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've been reviewing these breeding records you've maintained so diligently. Remarkable detail. Your father trained you well. He believed in accuracy. As do I. Which is why I'm troubled by some discrepancies I've noticed." Edmund pulled out several pages covered in her handwriting. For instance, this entry for Midnight's Promise. "You list her sire as Tempest's Call, but my registration documents clearly show Storm King as the sire." Beatrice's heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. "Perhaps there's been an error in the registration, or perhaps in your records." Edmund's tone remained pleasant, which made it more menacing. "Memory can be unreliable, especially when one is grieving. It's possible you've confused some of the bloodlines." He was testing her, she realized, trying to determine if she'd noticed the discrepancies, if she posed a threat. "My records are accurate. I maintained them alongside my father for years." "I'm sure you believe that." Edmund stood, moving around the desk with deliberate casualness. "But the official documents are what matter in business, Miss Talford. Registered bloodlines, certified pedigrees, these are legal facts. Personal notebooks, however detailed, are merely interpretation." "Are you saying my father's records are wrong?" I'm saying that grief and wishful thinking can cloud judgment. Your father was a brilliant man, but even brilliant men make mistakes. Edmund stopped close to her, using his height to intimidate, and children, even devoted children, sometimes misremember their fathers as more infallible than they were. The insult was carefully wrapped in concern, impossible to challenge without seeming emotional. Beatrice forced herself to breathe, to think. Edmund was establishing a narrative. If she accused him of fraud, he'd claim she was confused, grief-stricken, unable to accept that her father's records contained errors. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I need accurate records, Miss Talford, and I'm no longer confident yours meet that standard. Therefore, I'll be having my solicitor prepare new documentation based on the official registrations." Edmund returned to his desk, dismissing her with body language. "You're relieved of record-keeping duties, effective immediately." The floor seemed to tilt. Without access to the breeding records, she had no way to continue documenting Edmund's fraud. And without her role as record-keeper, she had even less value on the estate, one step closer to complete expulsion. "And my position as instructor?" she managed, "unchanged for now, assuming tomorrow's demonstration with Storm's Edge goes well." Edmund's smile sharpened. "Speaking of which, I've invited several potential buyers to observe. If the horse proves manageable, they may be interested in purchasing him. If not, well, we've already discussed that outcome." He was cornering her from multiple directions, removing her access to evidence, threatening Storm's Edge, undermining her position. And if she fought back without proof, solid enough to withstand his denials, she'd only make herself look unstable. "I understand," Beatrice said, though understanding felt like swallowing glass. "Excellent. Oh, and Miss Talford, I've noticed you spending considerable time with Ashton." Edmund's tone turned speculative. "Late evenings in the tackroom office, early mornings in the training ring. I trust you're maintaining appropriate boundaries. I'd hate for rumors to damage your reputation further." There it was, the threat wrapped in false concern. He knew about their meetings, or suspected enough to weaponize the implication. In Beatrice's precarious position, even a hint of impropriety could destroy what little standing she had left. "Mr. Ashton and I are working to save Storm's Edge," she said evenly, "as you requested. Of course, I simply want to ensure propriety is maintained. Your father would have wanted that. The invocation of her father was the final cruelty." Beatrice left before she could say something unforgivable, her hands shaking with suppressed rage. She found Ashton still in the stable, grooming Storm's Edge with methodical care. He took one look at her face and set aside the brush. What happened? She told him everything: Edmund's accusations about the records, her dismissal from record-keeping duties, the implied threats about her reputation. With each word, Ashton's expression darkened. "He's moving faster than I expected," Ashton said when she finished. "Which means he's more threatened than he's showing. That's good." "How is any of this good?" "Because frightened men make mistakes. Edmund's trying to control too many variables at once, discrediting you, threatening the horse, watching us, preparing for tomorrow's demonstration. Something will slip. Or he'll succeed in destroying everything." Beatrice sank onto a hay bale, exhaustion crashing over her. "John, I don't know how to fight this. He controls the documents, the property, my position here. Even if we expose his fraud, who would believe us over him?" Ashton crouched before her, his grey eyes intense. "Do you trust me?" "I barely know you." "That's not an answer." Beatrice studied his face. The sharp features, the barely contained anger on her behalf, the certainty in his gaze. She should say no, should protect herself from further risk. But something in her recognized something in him, a shared understanding of injustice and the desperate need to correct it. "Yes," she said, "I trust you." "Then trust me when I say we're going to win this." Not today, not with dramatic accusations that he can deflect, but systematically, carefully, by forcing him into a position where the truth becomes unavoidable. Ashton's hand covered hers, warm and steady. Tomorrow's demonstration. Let's give Edmund exactly what he thinks he wants. I don't understand. Storm's Edge is ready to be handled by someone he trusts, but Edmund's bringing witnesses expecting either complete success or dramatic failure. What if we give them something in between? Something that makes Edmund's future actions look increasingly suspicious. Beatrice's mind raced, following his logic. If Storm's Edge performs well but not perfectly, Edmund can't justify putting him down without looking cruel. But he also can't sell him immediately without more training, which buys us time. Time to gather more evidence, to find buyers Edmund's defrauded, to build a case that can't be dismissed. Ashton's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture that sent heat through her despite everything. And time for Storm's Edge to fully recover, which is what matters most. You're suggesting we deliberately give an imperfect demonstration. I'm suggesting we give an honest one. Show Storm's Edge's progress without exaggerating his readiness. Let Edmund's witnesses see a valuable horse that needs time, not a dangerous animal that needs destroying. It was clever, Beatrice realized, a middle path that protected Storm's Edge while avoiding direct confrontation with Edmund. But it required perfect execution. Too much progress, and Edmund would sell the horse out from under them. Too little, and he'd have his excuse for execution. We'll need to be very careful tomorrow, she said. We will be, but tonight we should rest. You're exhausted, and tomorrow requires clear thinking. He was right, though Beatrice hated admitting it. She stood, suddenly aware of how close they were, how his hand still held hers. In the stable's dim light, surrounded by the scent of hay and horses, the moment felt suspended, possibility hanging between them like breath before speech. "John," she said softly, "after this is over, after we've dealt with Edmund, will you tell me who you really are?" Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or resignation. "You've guessed I'm not simply a stable master. I've guessed you're many things you haven't admitted, but I'm choosing to trust you anyway." Why? Because actions matter more than words, and your actions have been nothing but honest, even when your words haven't been. She squeezed his hand gently. "But I'd like the words too. Eventually." "Eventually," he agreed quietly. "When this is finished, I'll tell you everything, I promise." It would have to be enough. Beatrice released his hand and left the stable, feeling his gaze on her back until the shadows swallowed her. That night, sleep came fitfully, her dreams full of horses and fraudulent documents and grey eyes that saw too much. The morning of the demonstration dawned clear and cold, autumn asserting itself with frost-touched grass and breath-mist air. Beatrice arrived at the training ring to find it already surrounded by spectators, not just Edmund's invited buyers, but stable staff, estate workers, even some neighbouring gentry who'd heard rumours of the difficult stallion. Edmund stood at the ring's edge, playing the gracious host, gesturing grandly as he explained Storm's Edge's supposed temperament issues. Thomas Gentry lurked nearby, his expression a mask of false concern that made Beatrice's skin crawl. Ashton waited inside the ring with Storm's Edge, who seemed to sense the crowd's tension. The stallion shifted restlessly, ears swiveling toward the gathered observers. When Beatrice slipped through the gate, Storm's Edge calmed slightly, her presence a reassurance. "Quite a turnout," she murmured to Ashton. "Edmund wants witnesses for whatever happens next, so we'll give them something to witness." He handed her Storm's Edge's lead rope. "You first, show them what he can do." Beatrice led Storm's Edge through basic exercises, walking, turning, stopping on command. The stallion responded well, his earlier training with her father evident in his fluid obedience. She could hear murmurs from the crowd, see Edmund's expression tighten as Storm's Edge performed without incident. Then she introduced the saddle. Storm's Edge tensed, but accepted it. allowing her to secure the girth without resistance. More murmurs, some impressed. Edmund's jaw had gone tight. Mounting was the critical moment. Beatrice gathered the reins, placed her foot in the stirrup, and swung up in one smooth motion. Storm's Edge shifted beneath her weight, a moment of uncertainty, muscles bunching, but didn't bolt. She held her breath, counting heartbeats, until the stallion relaxed into her guidance. They walked the ring's perimeter, then moved to a trot. Storm's Edge's gait was slightly rough, still adjusting to carrying a rider after months without, but he was clearly trying, clearly intelligent enough to understand what was being asked. Beatrice dismounted to genuine applause. Several of Edmund's invited buyers were nodding, making notes. This was not the dangerous, unmanageable animal Edmund had described. "Mr. Ashton will now demonstrate," Edmund called out, his voice strained with false heartiness. "Let's see how the horse handles a different rider." Ashton mounted with the same efficient grace Beatrice had seen before. Storm's Edge accepted him with only minor nervousness, and they repeated the same exercises. Walk, trot, smooth transitions. The stallion was proving himself manageable by any reasonable standard, but then Edmund did something unexpected. "Gentry," he called. "You know the horse's moods. Come check his temperament." Thomas Gentry entered the ring, approaching Storm's Edge with deliberate heaviness. The stallion's ears pinned back immediately. Gentry was the man who'd supposedly been kicked, though Beatrice knew it was a lie. Storm's Edge recognized a threat. "Easy," Ashton murmured, but Storm's Edge was already dancing sideways, away from Gentry's approach. "You see?" Edmund addressed the crowd. "The horse is reactive, unpredictable." "He's protective," Beatrice countered loudly. "Any intelligent animal distinguishes between people he trusts and those who've threatened him." It was a dangerous accusation, implying Gentry had mistreated Storm's Edge. Gentry's face darkened, and he moved closer, deliberately invading the stallion's space. Storm's Edge reared slightly, hooves flashing, and the crowd gasped. Ashton maintained his seat perfectly, bringing the horse back under control with voice and leg pressure. But the damage was done. The spectators had seen what looked like dangerous behavior. "Enough," Edmund called. "Bring the horse out, Ashton. I think we've seen quite enough." The demonstration ended in confused murmurs. Beatrice could see the calculation in the buyer's expressions. The horse showed promise, but needed more work. Not an immediate sale, but not a lost cause either. Exactly the ambiguous result they'd hoped for, until Gentry's interference. As the crowd dispersed, Edmund approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Miss Talford, I must admit the horse performed better than expected, for you and Ashton at least." "He's manageable with proper handling," Beatrice said carefully. "Indeed, which suggests he might have value after all, with extensive additional training." Edmund's pause was calculated. "I've decided not to put Storm's Edge down. Instead, I'll sell him to a facility that specializes in difficult horses. They've offered a fair price, and the sale will be finalized within the week." Beatrice's stomach dropped. "You're selling him?" "I'm placing him where he can receive the specialized attention he clearly needs. Attention we simply can't provide here." Edmund's tone was all false regret. "Unless, of course, you'd like to purchase him yourself. I'd be willing to part with him for, say, £3,000, as a gesture of respect for your father's memory." £3,000, a fortune she didn't have, and Edmund knew it. This was another trap, offering false hope while ensuring she couldn't actually save Storm's Edge. "I don't have that sum," Beatrice said, her voice hollow. "A pity. Then the sale to the training facility will proceed. They'll collect him in 5 days. Edmund turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and given that Storm's Edge will soon be gone, I'm afraid I'll no longer need an additional instructor. Your position here will conclude at month's end, Miss Talford. I'm sure you understand. Economic necessity." He walked away, leaving Beatrice frozen in place. Around her, the estate continued its usual rhythm. Grooms leading horses, maids hanging laundry, life moving forward while her world collapsed. She'd lost the records, the horse, her position. Everything her father had built, everything she'd tried to preserve, was being systematically stripped away. "Beatrice," Ashton's voice low and urgent, "come with me, now." She followed numbly as he led her away from the ring, through the stable and into the tackroom office. He closed the door, checked that they were truly alone, then turned to face her. "Edmund's forcing the endgame," Ashton said. "Which means we need to move faster than planned." "Move how?" "He's selling Storm's Edge. He's dismissed me. We have no legal standing, no proof he'll accept. No, we have proof, and we have more than legal standing." Ashton took a breath, and something in his expression shifted, the careful, stable master persona falling away to reveal something harder, more authoritative beneath. "Beatrice, I need to tell you something. Something I should have revealed days ago. John, my name is Jonathan Ashcroft. My father is the Duke of Moorland. I'm his heir." The words didn't process immediately. Beatrice stared at him, at this man she'd been working beside, trusting, almost. "What?" "I came here under false identity to investigate Edmund Haverfield for fraud. My father's been purchasing horses from this estate for years, and 3 months ago we discovered discrepancies in the bloodlines. Horses not performing as their pedigrees suggested they should. When we investigated, we found Edmund's registration documents didn't match historical breeding records." Beatrice's mind raced, pieces clicking into terrible place. "You've been investigating this whole time, using me to access the records." "No, I mean, yes, initially that was part of the plan, but then I met you, and I saw what Edmund was doing to you, and—" Jonathan, ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "It stopped being just about fraud. It became about justice. For you, for your father, for every buyer Edmund's deceived. You lied to me. I used a false name and didn't reveal my full purpose. But I never lied about my intentions to help you. That was always real." Beatrice wanted to be angry, wanted to feel betrayed, but the emotion wouldn't come. Because he was right, his actions had been nothing but supportive, even when his words had been incomplete. And if he truly was the Duke's heir, that meant he had resources she'd never imagined. "Why tell me now?" she asked. "Because we're out of time for careful investigation. Edmund's moving to sell Storm's Edge and expel you from the estate. If we're going to stop him, I need to act in my actual capacity. Not as a stable master, but as the future Duke of Moorland." Jonathan's grey eyes held hers steadily. "But I won't do that without your consent. This will expose you to scrutiny, to questions about our relationship, to potential scandal. If you want to walk away, find another position elsewhere, and leave Edmund unchallenged. I'll understand." "Walk away?" Beatrice laughed, the sound slightly unhinged. "And let him keep everything he's stolen? Let him sell Storm's Edge to some facility that might destroy him? Let him continue defrauding buyers with my father's corrupted legacy? Then you're with me?" "I've been with you since the moment you saved Storm's Edge in that courtyard." Beatrice stepped closer, her decision crystallizing. "If you have the power to stop Edmund, to expose what he's done, then use it. Scandal and scrutiny be damned." Something fierce and admiring flashed across Jonathan's face. "You're remarkable, you know that." "I'm angry. There's a difference." "No, you're remarkable." He moved closer, his hand rising to cup her face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity in his eyes. "And when this is over, when Edmund's been dealt with and the scandal's past, I'm going to spend considerable time proving that to you." Beatrice's breath caught. "That sounds like a promise, Your Grace." "Jonathan, still just Jonathan to you." His thumb brushed her cheekbone, echoing that almost touch from nights ago. "And it is a promise." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable, like gravity, like weather, like all the tension of the past week finding its natural conclusion. Jonathan's mouth on hers was gentle at first, asking rather than demanding. But Beatrice responded with the full force of her pent-up emotions, fear and anger and hope, all channeling into the press of lips, the slide of tongues, the desperate need for connection in the face of uncertainty. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers. "We should stop. Probably. We have work to do." "I know." Neither of them moved. Beatrice's hands had somehow found their way to Jonathan's shoulders, feeling the tension in his muscles, the barely leashed control. He'd been holding back for days, she realized, not just his identity, but his attraction, his desire to act rather than observe. "Tell me the plan," she said finally. "How do we stop Edmund?" Jonathan stepped back reluctantly, and Beatrice immediately missed his warmth. He moved to the desk, pulling out the copies they'd made of the breeding records and Edmund's falsified documents. "We have proof of fraud, but Edmund can claim we forged these copies. What we need is for him to publicly contradict himself, to defend his fraudulent documents in a way that exposes the lies." Jonathan laid out several papers. "Tomorrow, I'm going to invite my father's horsemaster to examine Storm's Edge. He's an expert in bloodline assessment, recognized throughout England. If Edmund's selling Storm's Edge, he'll need to present documentation of the horse's breeding. And when your father's expert compares the documentation to the actual horse, he'll find discrepancies. Storm's Edge's build, his temperament markers, his physical characteristics, they all point to his true breeding. If Edmund's documents claim different parentage, the expert will note it publicly." Beatrice's mind raced ahead. Edmund will have to either admit the documents are wrong or defend them despite expert contradiction. Exactly, and once questions are raised about Storm's Edge's documentation, other buyers will start examining their purchases more carefully. The whole structure collapses. But Edmund could just refuse the examination. He controls the property. He could. Except I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. I'll purchase Storm's Edge for £5,000, sight unseen, if he can provide verified documentation of breeding. Jonathan's smile was sharp. Edmund's greedy. He won't turn down £5,000, especially from a duke's son, and he's arrogant enough to believe his forgeries will withstand scrutiny. It was clever and dangerous in equal measure. If Edmund accepted, they'd have him trapped between expert testimony and fraudulent documents. But if he suspected Jonathan's true purpose, "He'll investigate you," Beatrice said. "Once he knows you're the Duke's heir, he'll wonder why you were here working as a stable master. Let him wonder. By the time he pieces it together, we'll have enough evidence to bury him." Jonathan gathered the papers carefully. "Tonight, I'm sending word to my father. Tomorrow, everything changes. And what do I do? You maintain your normal routine, teach your lessons, work with the horses, act like someone who's accepted defeat." Jonathan caught her hand, squeezing gently. "I know that's not in your nature, but we need Edmund confident, convinced he's won. While you maneuver him into a trap. While we maneuver him into a trap. Partners, remember." "Partners," Beatrice agreed, though the word felt inadequate for what they'd become. Partners didn't kiss like that, didn't make promises about after. Partners didn't look at each other the way Jonathan was looking at her now, like she was something precious and fierce and worth fighting for. She left before she could do something foolish like kiss him again. Outside, the estate had settled into afternoon routines, everyone oblivious to the coming storm. Beatrice taught her remaining lessons with mechanical precision, her mind elsewhere. Planning, worrying, hoping. That night, she watched from her window as a rider departed the estate at speed. Jonathan's messenger, she assumed, carrying word to the Duke. By tomorrow evening, everything would be in motion. Either they'd expose Edmund's fraud and reclaim what was stolen, or they'd fail spectacularly and lose everything. Beatrice found she preferred action to helpless waiting, even if action carried risk. The next day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Beatrice maintained her routine as instructed, teaching lessons and avoiding Edmund's gaze when their paths crossed. She saw Jonathan working throughout the stables, playing his role perfectly. Just another groom, nothing suspicious, certainly not a duke's heir preparing to bring down the estate's owner. Late afternoon brought visitors. 3 men arrived in an expensive carriage bearing the moorland crest, a shield with crossed lances and a falcon. Beatrice watched from the training ring as they were received by Edmund, his expression shifting from confusion to calculation as introductions were made. One of the men was older, perhaps 60, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life around horses. The other 2 were younger, clearly assistants. Edmund led them toward the stable, gesturing grandly, his body language screaming false hospitality. Jonathan appeared at Beatrice's elbow, startling her. "That's William Grayson, my father's horsemaster, one of the most respected bloodline experts in England. If Edmund's documents are fraudulent, Grayson will know. And if Edmund refuses the examination, he won't. I sent word this morning that the Duke of Moorland's son wishes to purchase Storm's Edge as a surprise gift for his father. Edmund thinks he's dealing with a foolish young aristocrat with more money than sense." Jonathan's smile was cold. "He has no idea the foolish young aristocrat is standing right here." They watched as Edmund brought the visitors to Storm's Edge's stall. The stallion, perhaps sensing the tension, shifted restlessly. Grayson approached slowly, his movements professional and unthreatening. He examined Storm's Edge from multiple angles, running his hands along the horse's legs, checking his teeth, studying his conformation with expert precision. Then Grayson turned to Edmund, saying something Beatrice couldn't hear. Edmund produced papers, registration documents, breeding certificates. Grayson studied them carefully, his expression growing increasingly puzzled. "Something's wrong," Jonathan murmured. "Grayson sees it." The conversation grew animated, Edmund's gestures becoming defensive. Grayson kept pointing to Storm's Edge, then back to the documents, clearly indicating discrepancies. Other stable staff had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Thomas Gentry appeared, his face tight with concern. Then Grayson did something unexpected. He pulled out a leather journal, flipping through pages until he found what he sought. He showed the entry to Edmund, whose face went pale, then red with anger. "What's happening?" Beatrice whispered. "Grayson keeps genealogical records of major bloodlines. If Storm's Edge's supposed sire is in those records, Grayson can verify whether Storm's Edge's physical characteristics match." Jonathan's voice was tense with anticipation. Edmund's about to be caught in a public lie. The confrontation escalated. Grayson's voice rose, carrying across the stable yard. "This documentation claims Storm King as sire, but this horse shows none of Storm King's distinctive characteristics. The bone structure's wrong. The marking patterns don't match. This is falsified breeding, Mr. Haverfield." Edmund's response was too quiet to hear, but his body language screamed defensiveness. He gestured sharply to Gentry, who stepped forward as if to physically intimidate Grayson, but the horsemaster stood his ground, flanked by his assistants. "We should go," Jonathan said. "Time to reveal my part in this." They crossed the stable yard together, drawing startled looks from the gathered staff. Edmund spotted them approaching, and confusion flickered across his face. Why was his expendable stablemaster walking with such authority? "Mr. Grayson," Jonathan called. "What seems to be the problem?" Grayson turned, relief evident in his expression. "Lord Ashcroft, thank heavens! I was attempting to examine the horse you expressed interest in. But the documentation, Mr. Haverfield provided is highly questionable." The reaction was immediate. Edmund's face went slack with shock. The gathered staff began whispering, eyes darting between Jonathan and Edmund. Beatrice saw realization dawn in multiple expressions. The stable master who'd appeared so mysteriously was actually nobility conducting an investigation. Lord Ashcroft. Edmund's voice was carefully controlled, but Beatrice heard the fury beneath. I'm afraid I don't understand. My stable master's name is John Ashton. Forgive the deception, Jonathan said, not sounding apologetic at all. I'm Jonathan Ashcroft, heir to the Duke of Moorland. I've been here investigating reports of fraudulent bloodline documentation, reports that Mr. Grayson's examination seems to have confirmed. The silence that followed was absolute. Edmund's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his mind clearly racing through implications. If Jonathan had been investigating, if he'd been here for days with full access, this is preposterous, Edmund finally managed. You've no authority to investigate my business. I've every authority when that business involves defrauding my father and dozens of other buyers. Jonathan's tone had gone cold, aristocratic authority replacing the stable master's deference. Storm's Edge is just one example. How many other horses have you sold with falsified documentation, Mr. Everfield? I've falsified nothing. If there are discrepancies, they must be errors in the original records. Edmund's gaze shot to Beatrice, accusation and calculation warring in his expression. Miss Talford maintained the breeding records. Any mistakes would be hers. It was exactly what Beatrice had feared, Edmund deflecting blame, using her grief and inexperience as shield. But before she could respond, Jonathan stepped forward, his presence suddenly commanding in a way it hadn't been as a stable master. Miss Talford's records are impeccable. I've reviewed them extensively, and they match historical breeding documentation perfectly. Jonathan pulled papers from his coat, copies of the evidence they'd gathered. Your official registration documents, however, show consistent inflation of bloodlines. Inferior horses claim to have champion breeding, temperament issues attributed to prestigious lines to justify failings. It's systematic fraud, Mr. Haverfield. Lies. Edmund's composure was cracking. You forged those copies, or she has, to discredit me. I've forged nothing. Beatrice's voice rang clear across the stable yard. Those are exact copies of my father's records, records Edmund tried to take from me yesterday, records that prove his documentation is false. The gathered crowd murmured, stable staff and estate workers watching their employer squirm. Gentry had moved closer to Edmund, protective and menacing, but he was one man against mounting evidence. Mr. Grayson, Jonathan said, would you be willing to examine other horses on this estate? Compare their physical characteristics to their documented breeding? Gladly, my lord. Grayson's expression was grim. If there's systematic fraud occurring, it needs to be exposed. This is my property, Edmund snarled. You can't just— I can, actually. Jonathan's smile was cold. My father is Duke of Moorland. His authority in matters of horse-breeding fraud is considerable, especially when his own stable has been victimized. You can cooperate with this examination, Mr. Haverfield, or you can face formal charges immediately. Your choice. Edmund's face had gone purple with rage and fear. He looked around at the gathered crowd, at Grayson's assistants already moving toward the stable, at Beatrice standing beside Jonathan with quiet triumph. Trapped. Publicly, undeniably trapped. You planned this, he hissed at Jonathan. Came here under false pretenses, seduced my employee. I came here seeking truth, Jonathan interrupted, and found considerably more corruption than anticipated. Miss Talford assisted because you've been stealing from her as well. Her inheritance, her father's share of this business, horses that should have been hers by right. I paid her the settlement the law required. You paid her a fraction of what she was owed, and you know it. Jonathan's voice had gone dangerous. The partnership dissolution documents you forged show joint ownership of all horses passing to you, but the original partnership agreement, which I've obtained from your solicitor's archived files, clearly states that breeding stock was to be divided equally upon dissolution. Edmund's eyes widened. He hadn't known Jonathan had accessed the original documents, hadn't expected that level of thoroughness. The solicitor had no right. The solicitor had every right when presented with a Duke's writ requesting documentation relevant to fraud investigation. Jonathan stepped closer to Edmund, using his height advantage. "You've been caught, Haverfield. The question now is whether you compound your crimes by continuing to lie, or whether you salvage what little dignity remains by confessing." For a long moment, Edmund seemed to consider fighting. His hands clenched into fists, his breath coming fast. Gentry shifted behind him, and Beatrice tensed, wondering if violence might erupt. Then Edmund's shoulders slumped. "What do you want?" "The truth, publicly stated, in front of all these witnesses." Jonathan gestured to the gathered crowd. "How many horses have you sold with falsified bloodlines? How much money have you stolen from Miss Talford's inheritance?" "I don't—" Edmund's voice cracked. "I don't have exact figures." Then estimate." The confession came slowly, painfully, like blood from a wound. Edmund had been falsifying documents for nearly 3 years, since shortly before Beatrice's father died. Dozens of horses sold to unsuspecting buyers with inflated breeding claims. Thousands of pounds in ill-gotten profits, and Beatrice's inheritance, the horses that should have been hers, valued at over £5,000, reduced to a £500 settlement through fraudulent documentation. With each admission, Edmund seemed to shrink, his earlier authority evaporating. The gathered staff watched with mixed expressions: shock, vindication, disgust. Some had clearly suspected something was wrong. Others seemed genuinely surprised. When Edmund finally finished, silence hung heavy over the stable yard. Then Jonathan spoke, his voice formal and final. "Edmund Haverfield, I'm placing you under citizen's arrest for fraud, theft, and breach of contract. You'll be held here until the magistrate arrives to take official custody. You can't, I can, and I am." Jonathan gestured to 2 of the burlier grooms. "Take Mr. Haverfield to his study and ensure he remains there. Gentry, you're dismissed from this estate immediately. If you're found on the property after sunset, you'll face charges as an accomplice." Gentry looked like he wanted to argue, to fight, but faced with Jonathan's aristocratic authority and the hostile crowd, he simply turned and fled. The grooms led Edmund away, the former estate owner diminished and defeated. Beatrice stood amid the chaos, her heart pounding. It was over. Edmund was exposed, confessed, arrested. Everything she'd feared, the humiliation, the loss, the injustice, had been reversed in the span of an hour. Jonathan turned to her, his expression softening from aristocratic command to something warmer. "Are you all right?" "I don't know." Beatrice laughed shakily. "I think so. Everything happened so fast. Endgames usually do." He moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You were magnificent, standing there accusing him despite knowing he could turn it against you. That took courage. I had backup this time." She met his gaze, seeing past the title and authority to the man who'd worked beside her in stables, who'd saved Storm's Edge, who'd kissed her like she mattered. "Thank you. For everything. Thank me later. We still have work to do." But Jonathan's smile was genuine, unguarded. "Starting with Storm's Edge. He's yours now, Beatrice. Legally yours, along with the other horses Edmund stole." The reality of it hit her like a wave. Storm's Edge, her father's horses. The breeding program she'd thought lost forever. All of it returned. Justice finally served. "I don't know how to run a breeding operation alone," she said. "Then don't." Jonathan's hand found hers, fingers interlacing. "I know someone who's looking for meaningful work, someone who's proven quite good with horses, and even better with uncovering truth." Beatrice felt her lips curve into a smile. Are you offering your services, Lord Ashcroft? I'm offering partnership. Real partnership this time, with no deception. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture intimate despite their public setting. If you'll have me. Around them, the estate was returning to chaotic normalcy. Grooms leading horses, Grayson's team beginning their comprehensive examination, staff whispering about the dramatic revelations. But in that moment, Beatrice saw only Jonathan, saw the future stretching before them full of horses and honesty and hard-won justice. "I'll have you," she said softly. "Partner." The magistrate arrived within hours, summoned by Jonathan's message. The official proceedings took 3 days, statements recorded, evidence examined, Edmund formally charged. Throughout it all, Beatrice remained at the estate, working with the horses that were finally legally hers. Storm's Edge thrived under her care. Without Edmund's malevolent presence, the stallion's temperament improved dramatically. Within a week, he was being ridden daily, his trust in humans restored. Watching him run in the training ring, all power and grace, breeding finally allowed to shine, Beatrice felt her father's presence like a benediction. Jonathan remained as well, though no longer disguised as a stable master. He worked openly now, helping Beatrice inventory the breeding stock, contact buyers Edmund had defrauded, and rebuild the reputation her father had spent decades establishing. The work was exhausting and necessary, and they fell into partnership with surprising ease. Nights brought different challenges. With Edmund gone, and propriety already compromised by the investigation, Jonathan moved into the estate's guest quarters. They maintained careful distance in public, but private moments grew increasingly charged. Stolen kisses in the tack room, lingering touches during evening reviews of accounts, conversations that stretched long past midnight. "I should return to London soon," Jonathan said one evening. They sat in her father's, now her, office, surrounded by breeding ledgers and legal documents. "My father needs updates on the investigation, and there's the matter of my other responsibilities." Beatrice's stomach dropped, though she'd known this was coming. "Of course. You have your own life, your duties." "I do." Jonathan set aside the ledger he'd been reviewing, his attention shifting fully to her. "But I'm hoping to convince someone to visit London with me, to meet my father, to discuss the future of this breeding operation and how it might partner with the moorland stables." Partnership again. Always partnership. He stood, moving around the desk to where she sat. "But also more than that, if you're willing." Beatrice's breath caught. "Jonathan, I'm in love with you." The words were simple, direct, without aristocratic polish. "I think I started falling that first day, watching you defend Storm's Edge with such fierce certainty. And every day since has only made it clearer. You're brilliant and brave, and you see horses, see everything with such clarity. I don't want partnership without you, Beatrice. I want everything with you." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "You're a duke's heir. I'm a viscountess's daughter who works as a horse instructor. You're a businesswoman who owns one of the finest breeding operations in England. You're a woman who fought corruption and won. You're someone who values truth and justice and living things over social performance." Jonathan knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "And if society doesn't approve, then society can go hang. I'm choosing you, Beatrice. I'm just hoping you'll choose me back." The proposal, because that's what it was, even without the formal words, hung between them. Beatrice thought of everything choosing Jonathan would mean, entering his world of titles and expectations, navigating aristocratic society that would judge her background, accepting scrutiny and speculation. Then she thought of what refusing would mean, losing this man who'd stood beside her, who'd fought for justice when he didn't have to, who'd kissed her like she was precious and challenged her like an equal. "Yes," she said simply. "I choose you." Jonathan's smile was radiant, unguarded joy, transforming his austere features. He rose, pulling her up with him, and kissed her with the fierce certainty she'd seen that first day, like he'd found something worth fighting for and had no intention of letting go. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Beatrice laughed. "Your father's going to have opinions about this. My father respects competence and character. You have both in abundance. He'll adjust." Jonathan's arms remained around her waist, holding her close. "And if he doesn't, well, I'm choosing you anyway. I've spent too much of my life making choices based on what others expected. This choice is mine." "Ours," Beatrice corrected, and kissed him again. 3 months later, Beatrice stood in Haverfield Estate's training ring, though the estate had been renamed Talford Ashcroft Stables now, a formal partnership between her holdings and the Moorland breeding program. Storm's Edge cantered past, ridden by a young groom, learning the stallion's particular quirks, and Beatrice felt pride swell in her chest. The scandal had been significant but survivable. Edmund faced charges of fraud and was awaiting trial in London. Several buyers had brought civil suits seeking restitution, and the breeding community, while shocked, had largely supported Beatrice once the full scope of Edmund's deception became clear. Jonathan's father, the Duke, had been surprisingly accepting of their relationship. He valued horses almost as much as his son did, and Beatrice's expertise had impressed him. The formal betrothal announcement would come next month, after she'd spent more time navigating London society and learning the expectations of a future duchess. But for now, she was content here, among the horses, watching Storm's Edge finally fulfill the potential her father had recognized. The stallion had sired his first foal last month, a filly with her father's speed and mother's intelligence. The breeding program was rebuilt and thriving, honest documentation restoring the reputation Edmund had corrupted. "You're smiling." Jonathan appeared beside her, his presence still causing that pleasant flutter despite 3 months together. "Good day. Perfect day." Beatrice leaned into his side, feeling his arm wrap around her waist. Storm's Edge performed brilliantly in training. 2 potential buyers are coming tomorrow to view the yearlings, and the Duke's solicitor confirmed that the final buyer's settlement has been processed. So everything your father built is not only restored, but expanding. Because someone believed me. Because someone chose to fight when he didn't have to. Jonathan pressed a kiss to her temple. "I chose you, Beatrice. That's all I did. Everything else, the justice, the restoration, the thriving business, that's what you built." With your courage and refusal to accept injustice, Beatrice turned in his arms, studying the face she'd come to know so well, the sharp features softened by genuine affection, the grey eyes warm instead of calculating. "We built it. Partners." "Partners," he agreed, then added quietly, "and soon more than that." "Soon," she echoed, and kissed him as Storm's Edge thundered past, powerful and free, exactly as her father had envisioned. The future stretched before them, full of horses and honesty, partnership and possibility. Everything she'd thought lost, returned and transformed into something even better. They'd fallen for each other in disguise and truth, in stables and strategy, in the space between justice sought and justice won. And in the end, they'd chosen each other with eyes wide open, knowing exactly who they were and what they wanted, which made all the difference. Thank you so much for staying with Beatrice and Jonathan until the very end. If their story of courage, justice, and found love touched your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd leave a comment sharing your favorite moment, or simply subscribe so you never miss another story like this. You're the reason these stories exist, and I'm deeply thankful you're here.